you doing?
Thanks for talking with me.
Of course.
We already had our own introduction because we're friends and we're excited to see each other. Thanks for agreeing to talk about the work that you do and for being with me today.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a critical moment for folks to be getting interested in storytelling,
Yeah.
um, whether that's film or journalism or podcasts. I mean, the past few weeks, we've seen a dramatic drop in funding for a lot of the media that we're used to, a lot of short films or a lot of short documentary series. A lot of these things are losing their funding. And I think there's actually a huge moment to be doing this, like for the people, by the peep. So
Yeah.
definitely an exciting time to be thinking about, creating media and telling the stories that need to get out there, especially around food.
I love it. Yeah, a lot of our students are interested. A lot of the students in this class are interested in storytelling and using it in education. So that's another reason for this content project. But before we dive in, I know I have some questions for you, but can you just tell us who you are? Like, what's your name? Where are we talking to you from? What do you do? And I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the project that you're working on most recently.
So my name is Costa, and I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and I still live there currently. I've been doing documentary filmmaking for about 10 years. Started with, skateboarding videos in high school, and then kind of 2012 videos, and then it kind of went from there. And for me, I think probably started with people, I think must have been a film teacher, somebody in college kind of saying, you should really make the film that you want to see. If you're looking for something and you can't find it, it's probably because it's not there, and you probably should try and make it. And I think that for me, that was a big inspiration to do the permaculture documentary Inhabit, because I had been looking a lot for media around a lot of the permaculture ideas, and I just kept finding nothing. And I think that was the first real inspiration to be like, okay, maybe I should give it a swing. Like, I don't know, can't be that hard. And it was really hard. It took a couple of years, but I think at the end of the day, it was like, well, if you don't go make it and you can't find it, it's not going to exist. So I think you should I think a big thing for me has been kind of following your instinct about what you're interested in, and if it's not there, seek it out yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
No, that was perfect.
Yeah.
What the last 2 years you were traveling and working on a project, can you just tell us about it? Because I always ask students to talk about like what's alive for them right now. So tell us about the work that you're working on right now.
Yeah, so in 2015, I mentioned that I released that first documentary called Inhabit, a permaculture perspective. And when I was making that film, I started to learn a lot about how permaculture actually got its roots, from a couple of guys in Australia who essentially were learning a lot from Aboriginal people of Australia, indigenous cultures around Australia. And it got me thinking more about, needing to create more of a voice for indigenous cultures in North America. And, where are the folks, where's the space for the folks who have lived here for a very long time, to talk about sustainable land use management. And for me, like, it was an opportunity to kind of take permaculture backwards a step and try and connect to the stories of people who are still here, still practicing, how they relate to land. And that was kind of a 2-year journey me and my partner Anna went on about. She works for at the time she was doing sustainability planning for tribes in the Southwest. And so we had a few contacts and we started traveling. And again, it's kind of the thing of like creating the film that you want to see. It was something that we wanted to learn more about. And it's something we wanted to, be able to experience. And film is essentially sharing the experience you get to have with other people, right? Which is really crazy when you think about it. It's like memories that you get to curate and put together and then share with people. And so we spent 2 years essentially traveling, and it ended up being 6 or 5 different stories about indigenous land use, ranging from prescribed fire being brought back in Northern California to bison being reintroduced in Montana, the Blackfeet tribe, and I can link you guys to some more information about that project. But yeah, I mean, it was the same idea of following our instincts about what we thought was important, stories that need to be told, and seeing that there was a gap, seeing that there was a void of that stories being told on a bigger scale, on a bigger being brought to a wider audience. I'd say beyond just YouTube videos, trying to create something that could be into the film festival world, and then into like the college education level. And so for me, it was kind of learning from my first project and then kind of building on into like a just kind of continuing that, following the instinct kind of vibe.
Totally. I mean, that's kind of what triggered me wanting to talk to you. Like I said, I was thinking about this months ago because when I supported the awesome Kickstarter you were running for Inhabitants, that's the name of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember part of that language I saw either in the campaign you were doing was about, bringing it to be used as a tool in college classrooms. And as a program director of sustainable food and farming at a land grant institution, the narrative we tell about land grant institutions is incomplete. And
right.
It's like, oh, here's this land that was just gifted to us. And then there's just a bunch of white men in suits farming. And it's just like, I think that that's part of the story, but there's immense parts of the story that we're hiding. How do we decolonize and unpack that story and tell a more complete story? And so by you, like, I'm looking for that story that you're also looking to tell, so it's just like, that's kind of what got me excited. And I know that that's work that I hope we continue to collaborate. Like, I want to use that, film piece that you're working on in helping educate my colleagues and myself. How can we change the narrative that we tell? We're giving tours to prospective students and we're like in 1860 and I'm like, whoa, this goes before that. Like the moral land, like we gotta like tell a more complete story. But some of these perspectives, we're like selling a university. So it's just been like at what point do I want to tell these like 17-year-old students, prospective students, like day one, like, okay, well actually we need to unpack, but like the fear of not wanting to get into it is highly problematic. And so
I mean, so the history of the founding of this country is so overwhelmingly sad. The genocide is so hard to like wrap your head around, and the relocation of millions of people is so hard to like process. And it can't be done in a film. It can't be done in a 2-hour film. I think it takes decades of learning about it and trying to understand it. But what can be done, I think, is to connect to people who are alive right now, native people who want to tell their story and want to share what they're doing. And I think that's kind of the way into starting to understand how we can work together and be better for it. And I think the angle of the film was kind of looking at climate resiliency and climate change resiliency. And I think, that is a really important kind of like door into a lot of audiences that otherwise might not be interested in Indigenous issues. So getting kind of back to what you're thinking with your course, I think it's important to think about, what issues are people interested in and how do those connect to maybe other issues that you want to bring them into or want to talk about that are maybe a little bit harder, maybe not the thing they would click on to watch, but maybe, helping people understand how those topics interrelate. For example, one of the stories in the film is about Hopi dryland farming, which is down, in Arizona, very small Hopi reservation, but they're continuing today. Dryland farming, essentially, they don't use, any water. They don't use any irrigation, right? They depend solely on monsoon rains, and they've designed their fields for all the monsoons in the area to kind of trickle into the fields in certain ways where it stores water. They have seed genetics that can handle like 4 to 5 months of no rain, no irrigation. They plant their seeds. They can plant their seed 2 feet deep. I mean, it's the genetics have kind of evolved to be able to get through 2 feet of very hard soil. So there's things like that that are, when we're talking about actual food security and climate change resiliency, it's such a key component to connect to and understand indigenous people and what they're doing, what they have been doing, why they were forced to stop doing it, that break in, their tradition, but also bringing them into this conversation of like, what does it mean to like, be resilient, and how do we work together instead of, being overwhelmed by the past and ignoring it, you know. But it's really, yeah, it's a really complex, ongoing thing. How do you share information and help share stories without exploiting cultures too? So it's kind of a lifelong journey, I think. But
Yeah.
in terms of, what you're talking about too, I think the main thing that I would want to share though is it's really about, when it comes down to film or podcast, it's really about the people, and being able to connect with people and capture them in like a very comfortable way. I think podcasts can do that really well, and film can do that really well, but like I think the less of a crew and the less technology, the less less is more. And I think the more intimate you can be with people, the more you can kind of get into their real story and get through kind of some of the the awkwardness of being on camera and all that.
Yeah, I think it's in my asking you to be here is just like, you're an amazing filmmaker, and you have this gift where you can find the message by following your own curiosity of what you actually want to know, and create content and share it with the world. And I think that's something, as a lot of students in my class are educators, like they're passionate, they have a message to share. This project is only licking the like tip of the surface of this. Like it's a 3-week project. They're not going to go out and do, interviews with like footage. Like we have in this time, especially, we're limited by so many things, but I think those limitations can also provide like opportunities for someone to just like use what they've got and be resourceful. And that's what farmers do. So
Totally.
I think it's just like, I'm asking you, because like I said earlier, like students are in this advanced ag education class, and they are interested in both the human and also scientific dimensions of food production and the food system. So, I just want them to see that they can use their voice in a classroom, but some of them might not be farmers. Some of them might not be farm educators exclusively, but everything is education. Like these pieces that we're making, these things that have a capacity to educate, and the way that people are learning has become very digital. Like we're learning a lot through film, through short videos and stuff. So I wanted them to just, obviously, like I don't want my students to be like, I have to go create a massive film and interview people, but it's just to kind of like, I wanted to get them thinking about how a person who creates content for a life project and for a living, just hear your perspective is already like valuable,
Yeah, I mean, something to be said too. It's like, films have won at Sundance that were shot on an iPhone. The guy who made all those Gasland films, he used like a $50 camera. A lot of it shot on his iPhone.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter what equipment you have at all. Like if you don't have an interesting story that you're following and connecting to interesting people, then then it doesn't matter what camera you have, really. So I think like we're at a crazy moment where our phones are, most people have phones that are better quality than most cameras were 10 years ago. So it's kind of overwhelming, but it's also kind of exciting because it doesn't have to be such a big deal. And I think it can be a lot more, more independent and more creative. But I would say too, it's just like really about, what are you interested in, and what's the context for it? Like, why does it matter? I think that's something that's hard to figure out always. And it takes a lot of time, especially in terms of like agriculture. I think the context of like, where is it happening? Like, when is it happening? What's maybe some of the history in that place, and who's the person that's doing it? and why do they do it, and why do they get into it, and like, when's their first memory of doing it, or how, did they do it as a child. And I think kind of unpacking those, like trying to figure out how agriculture fits into people's lives and how it's part of culture, and can always be, open up new avenues of a story, or avenues of something that on the surface might seem really simple, like, oh, this guy grows carrots in a really cool way, and it's like, well, who taught you to do that, or when's the first carrot you ate, do you remember, what's your first memory, or and maybe his mom who came from another country, or whatever it is, like another culture. I think there's always so many layers, and I think that's what's, for me, that's what's really fun about film, or podcasts. Interviewing in general is really fun, because you never, like you're gonna say, like how much of it is planned out, but I think a lot of it is kind of following seeing what people are interested in talking about, and kind of following their lead, and just continuing to pick people's brains. And
Yeah, I think that's what makes it a
definitely.
good educator too, is like someone who can ask the questions or a good facilitator. The good facilitator asks the questions that they really want to know the answer to, or a good interviewer.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and I think whether you're asking those questions in an interview format, or whether you're just asking those questions to the universe, I think it's,
right.
like in this class we use a little bit of the Adrienne Marie Brown emergent strategy stuff, and looking at one of those principles is less prep, more presence. Like the
mm,
more, like I could come into my class with like a jam-packed agenda, but if something is like alive in the room, I'm going to miss it if I'm too attached to that agenda. And
mm.
so with you making your films and stuff, I was wondering if and how that principle might apply, or like how much of your work is emergent versus like a pre-planned, like I'm going to go to this place and get this footage and do this thing.
Yeah, I mean, so that's basically the difference between a documentary and a fictional film, right? In a fictional film, you get to write the script, and you get to make the location, and you get to fantasize with all. And then when you're making a documentary, you fall into that trap, and you're like, oh, it's going to be great. This guy's going to be awesome. This lady's going to be, and then you get there, and you have no idea, absolutely no idea what's going to happen. And you can be like, this person's super boring, but the dude over there is really interesting, even though he's not doing this thing. It's very much like a active process, and there's definitely, like, there's no way of knowing what's going to happen. I think that's the thrill of it. It's really fun about it. You have to be like, I think the most exciting part about it is like being adaptable, and being like, oh, well, that's not a possibility now, so how can we creatively show that this is happening, or what's another angle we can do instead of that angle, because that person obviously doesn't want to talk about that. So I don't know, I think it's like, it's more of again, like following your instinct about what you find interesting, but once you're like in the presence of it, allowing it to be what it is, and not trying to coerce it too much, because then you start to then you're kind of messing with what is there, and I think it will become obvious.
Mm.
It's definitely hard, and I think it takes practice, but it's also really fun, because it's always surprising.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really fun about it. You're constantly surprised, just like in everyday, in life, I think, and getting to share what you've discovered, whether it's a podcast, you've discovered information, or, but with video, you're really literally going to discover things and people, and, that experience. But yeah, it's definitely have to be adaptive.
Yeah. I just see so many parallels in this conversation, which is like why I wanted to have it with you months ago. And I think we did have it when we, used to live together. We would have these conversations of like, yeah, just like there's a lot of parallels. I remember when you were making Inhabit, and we did like a showing, a screening at UMass, like one of the first ones. It was so clear to me then, like, wow, this is such a powerful medium to be able, like, here I am at this institution, and we have these permaculture courses, and these students get to engage firsthand, but to really, like, I think a lot of the videos and the content that we create, like, offers a frame to see the world in a different way. Like, I remember talking with folks who had seen that film, students who had seen that film, and they had been taking all these permaculture classes, but seeing it in this other context taught them something new. And so even if someone like knows about stories of indigenous land, what you're creating is, it allows people to see the world in a different way. And I think that's just like what I'm doing, like what we're doing in our classes, is we're being with each other in a way that allows us to like expand the periphery of our view of the world. Like it opens us to see more, you know, and
yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling, you know, when you're showing a film that you've done to huge hundreds of people, and you're thinking like, wow, like if I didn't go there, they wouldn't be able to go there too, like through this medium. Like if I didn't go talk to those people, they wouldn't get to hear what those people have to say. And I think, like, you know, again, you have to follow your instinct about like who needs to be heard that isn't being heard, and you know, where are there voices that need more amplification, you know, especially in like a world of oversaturation of voices. It's a hard thing to know, but I mean, especially in terms of sustainability and food, I'm always drawn to people that are older, and the older, you know, usually the more interesting, because I think what we're really drawn to is experience, people who have a lot of experience. You know, there's a lot of people today who know a lot of facts, and I think we're kind of all overwhelmed by those people. And I think at least I'm really drawn to people who maybe don't know a lot of facts, but have been doing that one thing for 50 years.
yeah,
And they have a lot of stories, and they have a lot of things to say about it.
yeah,
You know, that come from stories and that come from memories. And I think that's what we're all like really drawn to in a way. And I think I think film is really helpful. I mean, the greatest thing is to interview someone who is like shocked that they're being interviewed. They're like, why would you want to film me? I don't, you know, they just don't understand. And that's always I've had that experience many times where people are like, you're coming here to film me? Like, what? I don't know. I'm just out here in the woods. Like, you know, and I think there's so many people who don't know how valuable their work is. And I think it's such a critical part for people who want to do storytelling and journalism and film, and it's such a key piece of that. Like, seek those people out and find those people who, you know, are living their best life, whatever you want to call it, but who are living, you know, in a way that they have like crafted over many years and decades. You know,
there is like embodiment. They're living it.
Yeah. And I think, really you're trying to find people who are passionate, because passion is so contagious. And I think it's literally the thing that drives like sustainable food movement, is the people who are passionate. And when you meet someone who's passionate, you're contagious. Be like, I want to fucking do that.
Yeah.
And like, I think likewise, like your passion is for wanting to come film them gets them excited. Yeah. And they're like, cool, like this is amazing. I mean, it's kind of like a secret, honestly. Like, I don't know how many people we should tell, but like if you basically call somebody like, I'd love to come interview with the camera and make a video and maybe put it up on YouTube, they're gonna be like, amazing. Most people, you know, especially if they're trying to promote their story or their business or their ideas, you know.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it's like an opportunity to get a free, like, you know, if you called them without the camera, like, hey, I'd love to talk to you for 3 hours at your house and walk around and look at all your cool stuff, they'd probably be like, yeah, I don't have time like that.
Oh my God.
But if you're like, I'm going to film it like pretty well and like put it in a video and share it, they're like, well, that sounds really good. And suddenly you're spending all these hours with these people that you like really respect. And
yeah,
kind of like a little secret, but
no, I love it.
you can really get a lot of intimate education from people, you know, just by helping document and share what they're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so true. You know, I've been on the receiving end of that, like, hey, could we like talk about life for an hour? And I'm like,
right.
Which I love doing, you know, but there's like, hey, can we talk about your program and I'll make a promotional video? I'm like, yeah.
Right.
I think that's something that, you know, as this person, like in my role, I teach this class, but I'm responsible for these learning objectives for these students in this class, but I don't want to say responsible, but I'm also paying attention to the learning objectives of the 4 years worth of courses that they're taking in this program, so that when they
Right.
graduate, they'll have these skills. Any organization, I think, nonprofit, farm, has something to share and something to tell. And it's like, there's a difference between like promotional videos and educational material. But I think if these students are launching into a role at Grow Food Northampton and they have a capacity to see where there might be a story to tell, I just wanted to like to
Yeah.
include that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely important to remember that like people don't care about facts, like people care about stories,
Mm,
and I mean, we care about facts to a degree that we can, but I think we can like really connect to stories because they're people and they're real and we can relate to them,
mhm.
and we can like feel those things they might be feeling or understand, and I think it's like you can spew like things about the food system, which I have done in films. I'm not saying don't do it, but it's important to also have those facts aligned with like stories of people who are doing it, who are making it happen, and like what it's really like,
Yeah.
and I think that brings people into it, and I think makes people care more
Yeah.
about it.
I didn't, this is kind of just like off the cuff, and, I don't want to put
Oh,
you,
look at you doing some freestyle adaptive questions.
I'm just flowing. But, in this class and like in my approach to life, I think a lot about like, as an educator, um, if I don't approach my work with awareness of my social identity, it's damaging.
Hmm.
It's damaging. Like I am a white middle class working woman, and if
Hmm.
I don't have awareness of that, like the more aware I am of how that is going to shape the questions I ask, that's going to shape the places I go and my capacity to, just it
Mm.
changes the
Mm.
outcome. I just want to know if and how you, and I'm like, this is something that's still messy for me, I'm still grappling with it, but like how you um bring that like ongoing questioning of your social identity into your work. And maybe it came up in your most recent project, and I don't
Mm.
expect like a clean answer, but I just want to hear a little bit of your grappling with that if you are.
Totally. Yeah. So I mean, that's it's definitely a question that we constantly thought. Who are we to like help tell stories of Native, issues and resilience? I think the first thing is like, you can reach out to people, and if they don't want to tell their story, they're not going to respond to you. And I think it's important to like to respect that and don't badge them. Um, you know, I think that can be a little bit like what that can get into the realm of like, oh, they should be doing that. It's like people are gonna do what they want to do. We probably sent out and made like hundreds of calls and heard back from like a handful of people, and those are people that really wanted to share their stories on that, like in the platform we were kind of putting together.
Yeah.
So that I think that's firstly like what's important is just being like, okay, those are the people that want to do it. Let's go hang out with them. And I think the next part is just building trust with people. It's like why should they let you
Mhm.
come into their world and document what they're doing? Well, if they trust you, they might want you to. And I think it's trust is so much about just showing up and spending as much time as you have and just being there and listening and not talking and not trying to impose ideas and just being super clear with what you're doing.
Mhm.
Just be super clear about, we're just trying to tell stories about resilience and whatever it is. And, building trust takes a lot of time. And going back to places 2 times and 3 times is what we did. I think was really important because by the second and third time, people were like, wow, you're really coming back. You're really committed to like getting all the pieces of this story. So that's all really important. But I think the key is building relationships with people, because that's all. At the end of the day, you could have any identity. If you build like a good relationship with someone, that is what's important, because they know that if you have a very clear like positive relationship and it's very clear about what you're doing, and you're really helping them. If they want their story to be told, then you're helping. But if they don't, then you're not.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things that takes time.
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of, you have to be all in.
Yeah.
Can't kind of just half-ass it, which I think is what people's fears are, that you're going to come and get it wrong.
Yeah.
And because I think there's been a lot of that,
Totally.
especially with like things like, newspapers, or like kind of like web news web thingies that just like do kind of little shitty jobs, and kind of get it wrong, and maybe not really put them in the
Oh,
best
I
light.
know. I remember this one time, my claim to fame, I did like an interview for UMass Magazine or something. This is like 10 years ago. And I was like managing the Amherst Farmers Market, and I had a great interview with someone, but the way that I feel like the way they made me sound was just kind of dumb. It was just like, I love kale. And it was just like a picture, like, it just like, I was like, wait, but what about all that really good conversation we had? Like, it
Yeah.
just, I felt like, and that's a really like innocent example, but I feel like, yeah, the longer this project is a very short scope, but this
Mm,
conversation that you and I are having is tapping into something that's drawing on themes of education and just media, and how um, being aware of one's capacity to educate and to be aware of how education proliferates and pervades everything almost, that
mm,
it's like I just creating content is a huge topic, but I just wanted to have this little conversation with you um,
totally.
to talk about storytelling, because that was something students I know are interested in this class. And
Yeah.
um,
And I guess the last piece of that, that I didn't mention, which is your own personal decision, but for us, it's being um, completely transparent
mhm,
with how you're putting it together.
mhm,
And, because, for example, like this project we're currently working on right now, we have like a tribal advisory board who is going through kind of the edits that we're doing and the rough cut of the film, and making sure it's the story that they want to be told, because we want to help do it, but we don't, we're not the people to say
mhm.
what should be in it or what shouldn't. And we're just, we're doing our best to tell it the way we felt like it was told to us. But we're also that transparency of like, is this what you want the world to see? Is this okay? Is there anything you want taken out?
Mhm.
And I think that's really important, especially, when you're working with folks who, their culture is sensitive, and there might be cultural information they don't want out there.
Mhm.
And I think that's hard to always remember for a lot of like white people who don't have sensitive culture, that they don't, we don't really understand that. And so I think that was a big thing for us to kind of really fully understand, because a lot of pieces of the culture they don't want public. And that's just like a super important thing to realize about all cultures. You might not even know the
Yeah.
people you're interacting with have, sensitivity about things. So just being super transparent, being super, open to whatever people's needs are
Yeah.
is huge. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, this is great. This is fun for me.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I'd be super curious to see what everyone's putting together in a couple weeks,
yeah.
and we could talk about it more at some point.
Yeah, it's just like these are my frame for this time that we're in, that is a trying time. It my expectations with the students right now, with all you students, hey, is less is more, and use what you've got. And that's something I appreciated you saying, like, use your like follow what's interesting to you and just have an experience. It doesn't have to be a perfect experience. These don't have to be masterpieces. These are might not be going to Sundance, but I wanted to just inspire their thinking around it, because one thing I miss about being in the classroom is just the inspiration that happens when we learn with and from each other, the like conversations um, that we have in our class, like our discussions are very like they inspire. And so I thought that I could capture a conversation
Mm,
as a piece of content to share with the students, to get them thinking. So thanks for doing this with me.
totally. Yeah. Thank you, and good luck,
Um,
everybody. And I think it's definitely good to be reminded that like what you think is important and interesting is going to be important and interesting to somebody else, and so it's worth figuring out a way to document it, or tell it in a way, whatever medium you want, but someone's going to be into it. Maybe like millions of people, but there's definitely going to be some people.
Yeah.
So it's worth it.
Cool. I'm going to stop the recording and then we can hang out more.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks.